Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. I want to try to practice both frequency and brevity over the coming weeks. I'd like to try to release more videos and I'd like to try to keep them a little shorter, just as an experiment, see if I can do it. For this reason, I'm going to try to talk as succinctly as possible about why I did not like Chloé Zhao's 2025 film Hamnet, starring Jessie Buckley as Agnes and Paul Mescal as Will (brackets William Shakespeare). I want to say up top there will be spoilers if you haven't seen the movie. And I also want to say, although a lot of people really love this film, and I've met a lot of people who liked it, I didn't. And I want to promise you that I'm not being perverse. To the extent that my taste or opinions are perverse, it's just a natural thing. I'm not trying to be contrarian. Now, I'm not going to claim that this film didn't have any positive qualities. The cinematography is obviously kind of aesthetically beautiful. There are many shots, especially some of the shots in the forest in this movie, that look like art photography. I also don't think there's any argument that Jessie Buckley really made the role of Agnes her own, and Paul Mescal played a very kind of soulful and convincing, sexy but slightly threatening or slightly pained Shakespeare. So the performances were good, and there is a core of a great idea in this film. I know that it was a novel by Maggie O'Farrell and that she was involved in writing the screenplay together with Zhao. I do think the idea of kind of dramatizing how Shakespeare's grief for his lost son influenced the creation of the play Hamlet, and how these two things are woven together, is a great idea for both a novel and a film. One more thing I do like about the movie is the way that they stage the kind of religious transition in the UK from a sort of pagan, forest oriented witchcraft to the Christian religion, and how these two traditions lived kind of in community with each other, but that the older religion of paganism was stigmatized by the Christian church, and how they staged this through Agnes's character. I did like that quite a lot, and I felt like it also kind of made sense in terms of like a lot of Shakespeare's plays that also stage this, such as Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, although I said that I thought that the idea of looking at the grief of the Shakespeare character and how this turned into the work of art that is Hamlet was an interesting concept, the issue with the film is that it is done in the most melodramatic style. For example, Hamlet himself, the child, dies because he tries to take his sister's plague from her and to trick death and to take her place when death comes. This is kind of played as something that he is imagining, but they give it enough kind of ambiguity that you can read it as if he has really done this. And then as he's dying, there are these kind of shots of him sort of walking away into the forest or through a doorway and crying, and then his mother is screaming, and everything is just like pounding you over the head with how you're supposed to feel. I personally have difficulty actually becoming sad or feeling emotional when I feel that I'm being enormously pressured to feel a particular thing. And everything from the score to the way the cinematography is done to the editing to the acting to just the entire cinematic language is just pushing you and pushing you and pushing you to feel tragedy. It's melodrama, it's a weepy, but it's not in this kind of operatic mode of like, say, Gone with the Wind. It's trying to be more like stylish and arty. But melodrama is basically like a form of pornography in the same way that like horror films are. You can't kind of have this sort of like elevated mode and at the same time be so extremely emotionally manipulative. Or you can, but then you have to be like Lars von Trier, you know, you have to be like shameless about it. From the point in time that Hamlet dies, the film is just continually trying to twist the knife. It's continually trying to make you feel a sense of tragedy, a sense of grief, a sense of sadness, and in a way that kind of I don't think allows the theme to breathe in any interesting way. And then they do some totally ridiculous things. Like they have the character of William Shakespeare going to the docks and standing as if he's going to jump and maybe he's going to end his life, and reciting to be or not to be the soliloquy from the play Hamlet, like to the camera, almost. You know, it's like the most hokey, on the nose possible thing. And it's not, the film itself is not kind of arch enough to get away with him suddenly delivering a monologue like that. Another thing that's like totally ludicrous is that Agnes and then her brother, played by Joe Alwyn, they come to find Shakespeare in London. And it's the first time in the film that anybody says his name. So they say, we're coming to look for William Shakespeare. And it's like, I wonder if they're imagining that like some person is sitting there and they haven't figured out that it's William Shakespeare yet. It's like they present it almost like it's a twist. It's so weird. So then, like, I was very kind of ill disposed to the movie by this point, but there were a couple of other really like moving moments. So when Agnes comes into the globe and they've painted the whole globe as a forest, or not the whole globe, but they've put up scenography everywhere that's like a painted forest. And her realizing that, you know, this is in some way like a tribute to her and their love. That was actually moving to me. I was a little choked up. And then when they started doing the play, what happens, if you haven't seen the film, is that Paul Mescal plays Hamlet's father. And he's playing to a younger character, a younger guy who's dressed to look like his son, like an older version of his son who's playing Hamlet. And when he's doing his speech as the murdered father about the feeling of poison going through his body, the wife Agnes realizes that this is Shakespeare imagining living his son's death and fantasizing about switching places with him. And this was very moving. I actually started to cry, except that so annoying, they had to like mark it. They had to have Agnes in the audience explaining that was what was happening. And then as this went on with the play and the performance, and like there were shots cut away to Shakespeare who's watching the play be performed for maybe the first time, and his wife's in the front row, you know, I was crying, I was very moved, but then it hit me that the reason I'm crying is because it's fucking Shakespeare. Hamlet is amazing. The language is incredible. Of course, at the point where they're using the play, you're going to be moved. They do kind of invest it with some other ideas or some other currency in terms of it being like a sort of moment of resolution between Shakespeare and Agnes. But ultimately, the reason it's so powerful is because the original Shakespeare work is so powerful. So I felt like they basically had spent 80 minutes on a mediocre introduction to a very, very short kind of chopped up version of Hamlet that was the most striking part of the film. And then they still managed to ruin it, because at the end they had this totally ridiculous sequence where everybody in the globe starts reaching out towards the guy who's playing Hamlet, as if this is a U2 show and you're in the front rows and you're trying to touch Bono's hands. The music at this point is on the Nature of Daylight by Max Richter. And I love Max Richter. And I was actually excited that Max Richter did the soundtrack to this film. But On the Nature of Daylight is the most overused Max Richter piece of music. And it is used again and again and again and again in exactly this moment in a film where it's supposed to be this extremely moving kind of resolution and you're supposed to be crying, and they play that piece by Max Richter to tell you you're supposed to cry now. And I was so irritated because I was like, if you've employed Max Richter as the composer of the film, why in the world have you used his most overused piece of music when you could have just asked him to create something else? And I think it's because my friend Harple talks about this. He's a film composer. Sometimes they've used a particular piece of music just when they were like doing rushes or they were like editing. They've used it as a placeholder, and then somebody like the director or the producer gets attached to it and they can't replace it because they just always hear what they originally saw. I'm pretty sure that's what happened, because it's a totally ridiculous choice and somebody should have forced them to not do it. So all right, that's my opinion of this film. I won't say it was terrible. It obviously wasn't terrible. It's too like well made and too visually striking, and the performances are too strong to say that it was awful. But I personally did not like it. I'll be very interested to hear your opinions if you did like it. I know that a lot of people did. Interested to hear your viewpoints on my viewpoints. Jump in the comments if you'd like to discuss it. I don't know how short I managed to keep this, but I did try to be brief. I'll see you again soon.